Welcome back, guys and girls, and I am very excited to finally show you one of the bigger packages in Adobe software we call Adobe Illustrator, Adobe Photoshop, and Adobe InDesign, the big three. Because most of the time when you're creating, you'll be using those free programs. And we're kicking off with Illustrator because it is an amazing package, especially if you really want to just start getting creative and you really want to start creating elements, logos, business cards, little posters. But to a large extent, Illustrator works with vector art. Okay, so I will explain to you what a vector art is in a moment, but let's just ask Adobe quickly what they have to say about Illustrator. Wow. So Illustrator truly is a powerhouse of creativity. It is a very extensive program, and like I mentioned to you before, just if you've got your Creative Cloud panel installed, just go to Creative Cloud and you're going to open the software from over here. And if you haven't installed it, just click on trial, or if you've got a proper license, just open up the software. And it will open it up like this. Now, it will have a startup screen. It will ask you what size document you want. I will explain that in a moment. Before we get to that, I just want to explain to you what vector is. When we look at vector artwork actually consists of mathematical equations that create the art that you see. So in other words, later on in session 1.10, we will be looking at Photoshop. There we can only work with what's actually been created, and we call that bitmap images. They can't go any bigger than what they actually are. But because Illustrator works on vector images or mathematical equations, when that image increases in size, it can literally be blown up the size of a building and it won't lose quality. But the thing about vector art is it's always flat art. Can you see here? There's no photos used here. It's all clean, flat artwork that's been created. Okay, so I'm going to zoom back. I'm going to close this inside of Illustrator, and the files that we'll use today is inside your example folders, and it's 1.8 creating a logo. You'll also find it under this video clip, or if at the beginning of your journey you downloaded all the example files, then it will be under 1.8. Okay, now I'll come back to the files in a moment. We're just going to kick off and sort of dive into the software first. Now, when you open Illustrator, you might find these panels that it's opening with. I want all of you to actually go to Window, Workspace, and then click on Essential Classic. So whether you're on previous versions of Illustrator, if you're on CS6 or a previous version of Creative Cloud, don't worry, because this will just change all of your tools and your panels to look exactly like mine. Right. Now, what I want you to firstly notice is on the left-hand side, we have all of our tools. And there's lots of tools in Illustrator. You can see there's some of these tools that have this little triangle at the bottom of them, all of those. And if you hold in your button, or your mouse button, you'll see there's lots more on that flyout. And the text tool, for instance, there's more on that flyout. The pen tool has more options. and you can go on and on and on. Now, I'll try and go through most of them, but to be very honest with you, with Illustrator, you have to just take a day off and play. You know, just kind of create whatever you want to. I'll show you some very cool techniques to get results fast, but it's such a creative program that I just want you to really go and have fun with it. So also, what you'll notice is on the right-hand side, you've got these panels. So we might be mixing colors later, and we might be creating gradients and strokes and appearances and all these things. But we'll do that inside of those panels. So the first thing I want you to do when you've set this to Essential Classic is let's create a new document. So I'm going to go File, New. Now, because I'm on a different magnification on this screen, I can't see this one properly, but I'm just going to jump in here and select Print and then A4. And you're going to click on Create. And it creates a document with an A4 page. Now, we're going to have some fun today because we're going to actually create a logo for a restaurant. And you can watch my tutorial, but then I want you to come up with your own name for your restaurant and then also to come up with your own logo. And as I'm explaining all of this, we're going to create the logo, then the business card, and then for your exercise, you're going to create a poster for the grand opening of your restaurant. All right. So first things first, let's save our file. So in Illustrator, we always save an open file as File, Save As. And I'm going to drop this into that Creating a Logo folder. Now, my restaurant's going to be called Fork. So I'm going to call this Fork. And whatever you're going to call your restaurant, decide now what you want to make the name and save it as that name. Now, what I can tell you, this is now what we call an open file in the design world. So it says Illustrator CC. If you want to open it or you want to give it to a friend with a previous version, you might want to save it back to a previous version. I'm going to keep it in Illustrator CC. The rest you can ignore. Just click OK. And you'll now see that that file is saved. Okay, let's see how we can maneuver around our document. Up here is what I call the property bar. So as you click through all of your tools, and maybe you're creating a square later, or rectangle, or a text box, then that property bar will change to accommodate that tool, which will give you a lot more options. Now, right from the beginning, get in the habit, use your black arrow, because when you create an element, you want to control that element. You want to move it around. You might want to select it, move it, make it smaller or bigger. So you're always going back to your black arrow. Okay, the white arrow is something else which I'll explain to you later, but the black arrow gives you control over the element that you create. Okay, now if we're moving around this document, you'll notice here you've got the scroll bars, and you've got the scroll bars on the right hand side as well. And sometimes you might zoom into an element that you're creating. In that case, you use the magnifying glass. And if you drag a little box, or you just click and drag with your mouse, it zooms into that area. And if you've zoomed into an area, you can use spacebar and click and hold and click with your mouse and drag, and that will maneuver you around your canvas. In Illustrator, we actually don't call it a canvas, we call it an artboard. And it's that A4 page is an artboard on which we're creating our artwork. Control 0 zooms back to show you the full page. All right. Now, I did say to you we're going to create a logo on this page, and then, of course, we're going to have the business card and the back of the business card and a poster. So let's create additional artboards in the same file. And down here is the Artboard Tool. And when you click it, it shows you that this is Artboard 1. And if I click over on the right hand side of it, I can create another additional artboard. Okay, and if I drop my mouse, it will create that artboard. Now you can come in here at the top and assign the width and the height of that artboard. So I'm going to make this 90 millimeters by 50 millimeters. Okay, and now I have the front of my business card. Now you can also click back on the Artboard tool, and you can alt click and drag to create additional artboards that's the exact same size. Okay, I don't know why Adobe is popping up with all kinds of things. I don't want to know about them right now. Right, so I've got the front of the business card, the back of the business card, and then for the little poster, let's create an artboard that will be an A4 size again, which is of course 210 by 297 and a bit, but I'll leave it like that. I'll drag this down so that now we have a neat file that we can work in. Now if I take my magnifying glass and I hold Alt and I click backwards, can you see there? There's all my artboards. So now I have some space to work in. I can create my logo here, I can play around with the tools. As I create nice elements, I can bring them into my business card or into my poster. So you have lots of space now in which you can experiment. Okay, I'm going to save this again now that we have our artboards, and let's jump in. So first thing that I want to show you is how most of these tools work, and I am going to go through them very quickly because this is really something that you can do on your own. You can really just experiment with these tools and, you know, play around to get some different effects. The basis of any shape or element that you bring in is that it can have a fill color and a stroke color. So let's do that first. I'm going to take this rectangle tool on the flyout. It's the very first one. And I'm going to click and drag a rectangle, and let me just zoom in here too so that you can see what I'm doing. Now remember the black arrow? I said always go back to the black arrow. And if you do, you get these handles around the shape. And by pulling these handles, you can make the shape bigger or smaller or resize it any way you want to. You can also go just outside the bounding box. Can you see how my cursor becomes a rounded cursor? And now I can rotate that element. Okay. I told you that your property bar always tells you more about that object or gives you more options. So firstly, there is your fill color. I can fill it with green. I can give it an outline of orange, and I can give it a stroke size. Can you see that increases the actual stroke around the object? All right, now I'm moving this down a bit. Over here, you can experiment with different line effects. Can you see they will all have a different effect on how the stroke actually appears around the shape. Next to that, you've got a very interesting tool. And here you've got some additional interesting strokes. Now, the more you increase the actual size of your stroke, the more you will see that effect. Okay, and there's a scribbly effect, and there's a little border effect, but there's more. In Illustrator, I'm going to say this a lot, there is so much more. Okay, if I talk today or in this session about this little menu that can't be found, then it's this menu. They're so small that you can't really see them. But if you click on that menu and you go to Open Brush Library, wow, look at these. There's hundreds of different brushes here for you. And remember, brushes can be used for that stroke. So let's go to Decorative, and then we go to Scatter. And it opens an additional little menu here that can be moved around. And now, by clicking any of them, can you see how that becomes the stroke around that shape? Okay, and you can do anything here, and the more you increase the size, obviously the bigger they will be. So go play around with those. They're a lot of fun. I'm just going to change it back to a basic line. You can always go back again, and you can say, well, I want another brush library, and then maybe go and look at some arrows, and you can create arrows around your shape. And if you set the size, you'll see that arrow. So there's so much that you can already do just with the few settings on your property panel. Okay. Now, that's applicable to literally anything that you create in terms of the menu here. You can do a rectangle, you can do a rounded rectangle, a circle or ellipse, a polygon, a star, and then a flare. Now, I'll take you through them quickly. And remember, they've got a stroke as well. I'm not going to create the stroke every time. The rounded rectangle you drag, and you'll see it's a rectangle with rounded edges. I'm going to delete that. And the ellipse, I click and drag, and it creates a circle or ellipse. Easy. Then you've got the Polygon Tool, and the Polygon Tool, interestingly enough, if you hold your mouse in while you drag this and you use your up and down arrow keys on your keyboard, you're still holding in your mouse, then you can give it more sides or less sides. So if you go all the way down to 3, you obviously get a triangle. And if you take it all the way up, you can get a polygon shape with more sides. All right, delete. Okay, then I have the Star Tool. The Star Tool, if you click and drag, hold in your mouse, the more you use the up arrow key on your keyboard while you still hold your mouse, you get more points to your star, or less, of course. And here's another interesting one, Command on a Mac or Control, and you can extend the, shall we call it the tails of that star. Okay, so that is all your shape creation tools. Then you have your line tool, and on the line tool there's a few extra options. So the line is just a normal line, and it sort of reacts to whatever the stroke might be that you have here. And again, you can have these different stroke effects, and you can give them a certain stroke width or stroke size. I'm going to delete this one. Then you have the arch tool. You click and drag and it creates an arch. Okay, and then you have the spiral, and the spiral, when you drag it and you use your up and down arrow keys on your keyboard, it will make it more or less turns in that spiral, and your control will, or command will control just how tight or how loose that spiral is. And then the next one is a rectangular grid. If you click and drag your grid, your up arrow keys will create more rows, your right arrow key will create more columns, your left arrow less columns, and your down arrow less rows until you have your grid. All right, let's delete that. And the last one, there's a nice little tool, the Polar Grid tool. And if you click and drag with the Polar Grid tool, you get a segmented circle. Up arrow key, more rows. Down arrow key, less rows. Right arrow key, more segments. Left arrow key, less segments. And you drop. And there you go. There's one last one here on the shape tool that I didn't do, and this is a flare tool. And with the flare tool, if you click and drag, you can create this sort of flare effect on your page. Okay, I'm going to delete that. And let's see what's next. Then we have the brush tool. And the paintbrush, you can click and drag sort of literally any brush that you've got selected here, and it will paint in that brush. Even if you've got a sort of a border effect, if you paint with that, it will paint with that border. And the same that I showed you earlier, if you choose a different brush library, then you're going to be painting with that specific brush. All right. Now, a very important thing that you need to understand about vector, remember when we said it's a mathematical equation? That mathematical equation is created by node points, and node points is created by the pen tool. So on the pen tool, you've got all these flyouts, and to give you a good idea of how it works, if I were to click once, and I'm dropping my mouse, and I'm clicking once on the page, that is now a node. My next node point, if I click and I hold in the mouse, can you see I'm holding it in and I'm dragging? As long as you drag it, wherever you drag it, whatever you do, it is creating that curve. We call that a Bezier curve. And when I drop it, that's the curve that I created. This line over here is controlling what that curve's sort of curve is. Now, if I bring it all the way down over here, I can click again, and can you see the previous curve defined how this curve would flow? Now I bring it up here again, but it's going to create a straight line if I don't click and hold. But if I click and hold, it creates a curve again. And then I bring it all the way back here, and I close my little heart. And now I can give it a full color. And voila. The nice thing about these Bezier curves is you can have so much control over them. And this is how people draw things in Illustrator or in literally any vector program, by creating these nodes and then manipulating these nodes. So if I were to take the white arrow now you'll see that I can control these Bezier curves and these points, and I can perfect whatever I created. All right. Now, it's quite time consuming to create from scratch. So just now, I will show you a technique that we use in the studio, of which we get fast results by using existing artwork from your royalty-free vector stock libraries. But in principle, anything that might be created will be with those nodes. And anything you create inside of Illustrator is, of course, just like that as well. So if I were to create a star again, you'll notice, can you see all those node points? They're all node points. So if I take my white arrow, I can control each of those node points. Oops. Okay, you have to click carefully onto just one of them. Can you see now I'm starting to really customize that shape because I am manipulating my node points. Anything in Illustrator can be manipulated with its node points. Okay, and with time, you'll do this more and more, and then you'll really see how this becomes a very, very powerful tool. Okay, I'm going to delete that and then create the following. I'm going to create a circle or rectangle. Let's make it a red rectangle, and I'm going to create a blue circle next to it. Okay. Now you'll see I'm clicking around it. There's so many different ways of doing the same thing. So you can choose your full color and your stroke here or over here. See how these swap as well? So whichever one you want to change, if it's the stroke color, you choose the bottom one and then click a color. And if it's the full color, you choose the top one and you can choose a color. Okay, so that's just a shortcut for you in order to apply color. So next, what I want to show you here is these little tools over here. And the first one is the rotate tool, and if you click an object, you can rotate that object on your page. And this one over here is the scale tool. You can scale an object, and if you hold shift and scale it, you do it proportionately. Okay, I'm using Control Z every time to undo, by the way. Your second one on the flyout is the shear tool, and that is to flip this object. It's almost like you're flipping it in 3D. Okay, I'm going to undo again. And then you've got this width tool. Now the width tool normally works with a stroke. So let's say I had a thicker stroke on this shape over here. If you take that width tool, then you can change the width of your stroke in certain points, make them bigger, make them smaller, and so on. All right, fun. Okay, I'm going to undo a couple of times to before I had that stroke. Now, also very powerful in any vector program is what we call your pathfinder commands. So if I were to go to Window and I go down to Pathfinder, it will bring it up. And there is all the different pathfinder commands. There's 6 of them, and then there's also shape modes. And the way you'll use them is by selecting both your elements, and then you can go through them. If you hold your mouse on them, you'll see what they do. Divide will divide it, but put it into a group and divide it. Okay, I'm going to undo it every time so that I can just show you. The second one will cut the one shape out of the other one, so it trims it. The next one will merge the 2 elements into one. The next one will cut the overlap and only give you the overlap. The next one will give you an outline. And the next one will be minus back, so it's almost like a cookie cutter out of the back one. This top one will create one shape from the 2 shapes. The next one will be minus front, so it deletes the front one from the back. This gives you the intersection only, and this one cuts the middle part that overlaps completely out, so that part is now transparent. So between those tools, you can really do literally anything. You can do some very, very, very interesting effects over there by just using your pathfinders. All right. Okay, next, I want you to select both of these and just delete them. So now that you can move around your document, just a couple of extra things that I do want you to be able to do. Let's say you had a blue blue rectangle, and I'm going to copy and paste it, Control C, Control V, or Command C, Command V on a Mac, and I'm pasting them next to each other, and I am not aligning them on purpose, because over here you have your window and you have your align command, and you'll see you can select all of them together and literally tell it how you want to align those elements. So if I want to align all of them to the top, can you see they're perfectly aligned now? I don't want to align them to the left because then they're all on top of each other. You also have more options here. So if you want to distribute, so there's one to make the spacing here between them exactly the same. Okay, so the line panel also very powerful for when you're creating elements. And then very, very important, if you want to group elements together, because you see these are still loose. So if you want to group them, you select all of them. I'm dragging over all the boxes, and I'm using Control G to create a group. Now they move together. They always move together. I can resize them together. I'm holding Shift and I'm resizing them, and they're literally in a collection. Now the interesting thing about Illustrator is in Illustrator you can work in what we call isolation mode. Now watch this top bar as I double click on my element. If it's a grouped element and you double click, then you go into isolation mode, which means you're now inside that group and you can change whatever's inside it. And when you click back out, you go back to a grouped element. And this is actually very powerful, because if you're starting to create very big illustrations, you're going to have groups upon groups upon groups that you're continuously manipulating. So then you want to be able to group them together so that whatever changes you made doesn't get in the way of the other changes, and vice versa. So if I double click again, can you see there, isolation mode? Just try that and go out of isolation mode again. Just to show you what happens as well, is if I had a red block here, which wasn't part of this group, and I go into isolation mode, can you see it's grayed out? I can't select that element. Okay, so that is isolation mode. I see a lot of people when they start out, they accidentally double click on an element, they go into isolation mode, and then they get lost because they don't know how to select elements again. Just check, are you in isolation mode, and jump out of it if you are and it's in the way. Okay. Then text. A quick roundup of text. There's your text tools, and there's lots of nice tools that you can play around there with. Now with text, you would click to create a text box, and we can write there, in my case my restaurant's going to be called Fork, and I can select that text by clicking and dragging over it, and then I can set the size of my property bar. And there's a nice trick here. You can click in your font box and use your up or down arrow keys in order to go through different different fonts. All right, so I'm going to just look. That's actually a nice font for me, Postscript, for the look that I want for my restaurant. But you can go through it and find a font that you would like for your restaurant. Now, you're not limited to the size that it makes it in. If I drag over it again, and I want to assign my own size, I can even go up to 300 here. I can type it in there, and there's my word. Now there's other things you can do with text. You can use this envelope, and then you can make your text sort of bump up or down in an arch, or in a bulge, or in a flag, or whatever shape you want, and you can control it from here exactly what you want it to look like. Okay, so that's the envelope tool. You can also change the way the text flows. Can you see paragraph there and character over here? They're hyperlinks. So if I click character, it will open the character panel where I can make changes to the text, the size, the vertical height, the horizontal sort of stretch. I can do all uppercase. I can do small caps, I can do superscript, subscript, underline, strike through. I can rotate the text even further out from what it is. So in here you can really play around to get the text to look exactly the way you want to. Okay. Now, if I delete that, I can also create a shape. And that shape can become a path for the text to go on. So if I take my text tool and I take this type on a path tool and I go really close to the circle, I can type around it. I can say hello, and I can type around that text. I can give it a color. You'll see that that shape is actually now invisible once you print this document, but you can literally type all the way around a shape. Okay. Now, what you can also do is manipulate your text. So if I had a word over here and I said my word is hello, but I'm going to make it into impact font so that you can all see it properly. And I'm going to put it here and make it smaller. Now, this text at the moment is still a text element, but what if I want to use it as a vector element? In other words, I want to manipulate the nodes inside this word. Then you can use type and then create outlines. And now you have control over all of those points. And you can really create something unique from that word. Okay, so that's your text. Now, we'll obviously be working with paragraph text as well, especially when we get to our business card. So in that case, you don't take the text tool and just click. You click and you drag. Okay, that creates a box of text. And in this case, we can now say, okay, well, I want the text to be in 14-point size. And I want to say my name is Rudolph and my number. And let me just zoom in there. And maybe my website address. And so on. Now, once I select this text, the rules for that text is under paragraph. Because now I might want to center align the text in that box, or right align the text, or I want to justify the text, or make more space on the left, or I want to make space in the first line indent. So I might want to say that the text is not supposed to hyphenate. So these are rules for paragraph text, and in Journey 2 in InDesign I will take you through a lot of paragraph rules, but for now just know where they are and you can play around with them inside Illustrator. Okay, so guys, that is pretty much the basics of Illustrator, and I only need you to know the basics to really start creating. In our more advanced sessions we'll take you further into the program, but I want to get to a really cool skill that we've been using, like I said, to create quick artwork. In any design, it's always good to go and find inspiration from other designers. Now, you can do that on Behance, you can go and look at what they've created there, but even better, go and look at some vector stock libraries. And the first one is vector stock. Now, let's say, for instance, we have been commissioned to create a logo for a restaurant, like in this case. And you're just looking for inspiration on logos for restaurants. And even if you just do this to get some ideas, it's already a goldmine of creativity here. So I can say here, all right, it's a restaurant logo. So I want to see restaurant elements. And it returns all these little elements for you. Look at that. And the thing about this is these are vectors, which means they are extractable. You can only you can use the whole thing as is, or you can use, for instance, just a fork over there, or take the star out, or you might end up going through this and finding some really cool ideas for a logo for your restaurant. Okay, it goes on and on and on. Vector stock is amazing. They've got 8 million little vector elements here, but you do have to pay. And let's say you go for this option here. Maybe you just want to use the fork there, like in my case. Then it's normally $1 to buy that specific vector. Okay, and then you've got a royalty-free vector that you can use. All right, now, other sites where you can get vector elements is like Graphic River. And throughout all your journeys, I will be telling you a lot about Graphic River. It's amazing. But you'll see here under vectors, they've got a lot of different vectors. There's decorative. You can do even a search. Look at those cool things that you can get over here? Maybe we can do a restaurant search again. Wait. Look at all those vectors. And even if you come across something that you want to use and you just want to pull the vector out, no problem. In this case, it is more expensive, $5, $8, $10, whatever the case may be. But you can get some nice stuff here. And then, of course, for you guys that's starting out, there's Vecteezy, vecteezy.com. And if I say click here, restaurant, then you'll see it will give me a whole bunch of little icons. And all of these are completely free. So how you would actually download these, and I'll show you one example just so you can see how to open them in Illustrator, is let's find something we can actually use here. Maybe I like the shape of this fork and I want to use that. So let's click in here. It'll open the file. You have to register for some of the vectors, but at large you should be able to download them directly. And it will download it to my download folder. And I'll just jump to that folder. And it's called VT. There it is. And I'm going to unzip it. Okay, now let's see what we get. In here is a encapsulated postscript. See there it says EPS. Sometimes you get an encapsulated postscript, sometimes you get an AI file, which is an Illustrator file. Sometimes you get a JPEG in there as well. Remember, JPEG you can't use because that's a bitmap file. So you do want an encapsulated postscript or an AI file, because those are the ones that Illustrator can open. So if I jump back to Illustrator, and I go and select that file. Where's my downloads? And I go all the way down. There's VT. And there's my vector file. And it's going to open it. And there's the file that I've downloaded. So you can see here that all these elements is actually vector. And if I use object ungroup a couple of times on this, I can get to the element right in the middle. I can get to that fork that I want. I can pull this whole thing apart. I can use the circle separately. I can use the patterns. It's vector. And I can now copy it between my documents. So I can take this fork, I can copy it, Control C or edit copy. And I can come to my design over here and edit paste. And there you go. Now I can make it bigger and I can give it a different color. Do whatever I want here. I can rotate it. And there I have my element. So what I've done for you guys, you can go in Vecteezy and download a lot of elements, or otherwise I've put together a sheet for you inside your example folder. And there it is. And it's called Restaurant Elements. And if you open it, it's got this sheet full of different elements that you can use. And I got these from Vecteezy. Go, zoom in, look around. What do you want? What is your restaurant about? What would you like to use? Maybe a glass of wine for the logo, maybe a little bit of fire, maybe your name of your restaurant's Heat or Fried or whatever. And you know, you've got so many elements here, and just go in and select your elements. You'll see with some of them they might still be grouped together because it depends on whoever created the artwork, and it's normally people like you and me. They might have grouped it together. So I would want to come in here and I would want to ungroup, maybe even sometimes a couple of times, because you don't know just how complex that shape is. And once you ungroup them a couple of times, you can start getting to all these inside elements. So now I can take that knife and fork, go back to my file. Can you see how both files are open there? And I can bring that in here as well. Or maybe because my restaurant's called Fork, I actually want a plate and put the fork on a plate. So there's a nice plate. I'm going to copy that and put it over here. Okay, now I've got a fork and a plate, and I'll make my little logo from that. So spend some time, go play around here, bring your elements through. This is the one time that I'll actually allow you to do anything that you want to in terms of busyness. You can bring lots of elements through, which normally isn't the case with some of the better brands. But I want you to experiment and have some fun. Now, I'm going to work with those two elements that I brought through. I've got my plate, and remember, you can still manipulate this vector. Remember isolation mode, if I double click on a grouped item, I can go further into it, and further into it, and further into it, until I get to a certain place where maybe I can change the color or whatever, and I'm going to go back out, and there you go. So you can manipulate that vector any way you want to. Now I'm going to put the plate here. I'm going to put the fork over it. Now can you see the fork is behind it? How do I get it to the front? If you click an element, you go to Object Arrange, there's your movement. So send to back will send it all the way to the back. Send backwards is one level backwards if you've got plenty of objects stacked on top of each other. Bring forward brings it one level forward. And bring to front will bring it all the way to the front. Okay, so now I've got an orange plate. Let's give it oh, that's horrible. Let's give it, well, actually I'm going to leave it like that with the orange. And then I'm going to create my text again over here, call it fork. And I might take that same font from earlier, which was Postscript, but go play around and create your own little logo here. And there you go. And I'm making the text bigger. I'm making it rotate so that it fits on my little plate. And I might still change this to a green or a blue or a different green or a orange, I don't know. Okay, for the sake of this exercise, I'm going to use it as is. Actually, now I don't like that font anymore, so I'm going to use Impact. Then it's one that you can use with me. And let's make it a sort of a modern styled name, logo. And you know, as you're playing around with your ideas, you might get to a stage where you decide, well, it doesn't work as a logo. Then delete one element. Maybe now I decide, you know what, just fork and that's it. That's my logo. Done. You know, the simpler the better. Less is always more. Okay. Now, I might decide that's my logo. I'm going to group it together and I've got a brand. Now I'm going to move that logo to the front of my business card. So I'm going to copy and paste it. And I'm holding Shift when I resize. And I'm going to put it in the front of the business card over here. And then I'm going to make the back of my business card. So I might want to get a bit more creative over in the back and copy and paste and ungroup them. And on the back, I might want to move this and move that away and maybe do a color background for the background of the business card. And I'm going to pull in here the color. And maybe the fork will be just a different shade of that orange. And again, moving that to the front. And I want to do something creative like that. And then have a text box here and put your name in and put your details in. Okay, and you just do whatever you want to here, and maybe you decide, oh, you want to repeat the fork, but you want to tilt it the other way and make it a different color, and then make it sort of bump off the page. Whatever you want to do, you can really now play around with whatever you want. And it's literally, we've created a brand, we've created a business card just by playing around with these elements. You can go back and you can get other elements as well if you want to bring them into your business card. Maybe we want to bring in a little flame, copy it, bring it in here, and maybe that we bring into the back of the business card. Now it's getting a bit busy, but you get the idea. I really want you to get into the habit of copying, pasting, experimenting. Let your ideas flow. until you know, sometimes I'm designing something, I would literally accidentally come across something that just works really well. So it's all about experimentation and, you know, just have fun. That's all it's about at the end of the day. So I'll zoom back in here and show you a few more tools that's just very powerful in Illustrator. I'm going to delete this. And the first one is your colors. Now you'll notice that we used a certain amount of colors when we created this. But if you click on your swatches panel and this little menu, it can't be found again, and you go to swatch library, look at all those colors. There's hundreds of colors. There's even gradients. And with gradients, be careful. You have to be subtle with your gradients. But you know, any shape that you're on, you can then apply any of those gradients. Same with words, or you can go back and you can choose some more colors. You can say food colors, and it gives you this beverages sort of color palette. And if you look at your swatches over here, you can actually pull the extra swatches that you want to use into that palette, and now you have more colors that you can use straight from inside your swatches panel. Okay, so there's a lot of fun there with colors. You can also do in here, there's patterns. So there's, for instance, decorative patterns, and then you can fill your shapes with some really cool patterns. And I did show you, or I will be showing you later in the app session in this journey, how to create these actual patterns on your cell phone. And you can do some amazingly creative stuff using patterns. Okay, so that is your colors. The other thing I want to show you is your symbols. So Illustrator has a massive amount of symbols, and think of them as Illustrator's answer to sort of clip art in Microsoft, but it's much, much better. So if I were to go to my window and symbols, it has just a few to start with. But again, if I click on this menu, I can open my symbol library. Look how many there are here. There's hundreds and hundreds of little elements. Maybe you're looking for communication and you're looking for a little microphone. You can resize it. And it's all elements that you can use inside your artwork. Okay, some of them isn't really usable, or it might not fit your style of what you're designing, but they're there. You can go back again and you can say, okay, maybe I want some map elements. And then you've got a whole bunch of map elements if you want to use that inside your artwork, or if you're creating maps. Okay, and you can delete them. You can go back again. And let's open here nature. Flowers. With flowers, there's a bunch of flowers, and you can drag these into your artwork. Okay. Now, an interesting little tool is this symbol sprayer tool, and it's got a lot of different options on its fly out. And wherever you select a symbol, you can then use this tool. If you choose this top option, and you can spray many of these little symbols. And as long as you hold in your mouse, it's creating those little symbols. If you hold in your mouse again and you use the symbol shifter tool, you can shift them in the direction that you're pulling with your mouse. If you use the next one, the symbol scruncher, you're bringing them closer together again. Okay, your next one is the symbol sizer. And if you click and hold on a symbol, you can change their size. The longer you hold, the bigger that symbol will become. The symbol spinner, as you click and drag, you can spin the symbols around. Then you've got the symbol stainer, and you have to choose a color, sorry. And then you can stain that symbol in that shade of that color. You can have multiple color shades, and you can create some very nice effects by using that. And the symbol screener, the more you click, the more transparent that element will become. And the last one I'm not going to do because you need a very strong graphic engineer, but with this one you can do a style on top of a symbol. Now I haven't shown you styles yet. I am going to show that to you next. So that's your symbol tool. Then you have your style tool, and the style, they call them graphic styles. Now, let me explain to you how graphic styles work. If you were to look at this rectangle, we said we can have a fill color and we can have a stroke color with its size. But what if you want an additional stroke? What if you really want to get creative and we make this stroke about 20 point size and we decide we want a gradient inside that element, or we want a pattern, or whatever we want to do, and we choose, let's say, a gradient here, and we then go to window and we click on appearance. All that a graphic style actually is an appearance of the element. So this is the appearance panel, and if I drag this out, you can see it properly. Any element that you have, and when you start applying these borders and things, you're actually changing its appearance. And in the appearance panel, you can go back and change it around again, whatever you want to do. But here's the interesting thing. At the moment, I've got one stroke. Now, in the appearance panel, I can give it another stroke. And maybe the second stroke, I make a little bit thinner and a different color. Now I have 2 strokes. And maybe I add another stroke. And this one I make yellow, and I make it even smaller. Now I have 3 strokes. Doesn't end there. On top of it, I can now control all of my strokes and my fills with effects. Now these are Photoshop effects. You can't use them, but you'd rather use these. Now you might decide, well, I want to sort of distort just one of the strokes. I want to put a zigzag on it. And set it over here. Oops, sorry, you have to have it selected. Let me go again. Come on. Okay, there. So now you can see as I move it, that one stroke will get that effect. And maybe for the other stroke over here, we might give it a different effect. And we might say, we want you to have a pucker and bloat. And we'll set it higher. And now that border will bloat out or have a different effect. And you see how you're starting to layer up all these effects, and it starts really looking really, really cool. I can go back to that yellow stroke and give it a stylized effect. I can give it a drop shadow, for instance. And if I preview it, you'll see you can maneuver these settings to really tell that drop shadow how to look or what to look like. We can choose this orange one, and I can go and give that a stylized drop shadow, or maybe an inner shadow. Maybe I want to do multiple effects. You see what I'm driving at? I mean, just look at that. It started from a normal rectangle. We're really starting to create something quite interesting now. So it's layer upon layer upon layer of effects, and you get some very, very interesting artwork. Now, once we have that done, we can actually save this as our own little graphic style. And you do that by going to graphic styles over here, or you go to window and then graphic styles. And you can now save that graphic style by saying new graphic style, my style. And maybe you choose to create a star next. And I'm going to give it less sides with my up and down arrow keys and use my control to bring it back to look like a normal star. And when I assign my new sort of effect that I've done, can you see they now have the same effect? Very cool. Now, those graphic styles, the one that you've created, you did purely on your own, but there's hundreds of styles inside of Illustrator already. So if you go to graphic style library, look at that. There's 3D effects for you. And you can create 3D shapes. And these are actually just appearances. Just like I showed you now, these are just pre-made. So I can go back again And I can say, okay, open up textures. And we'll open a texture library, and now you can apply these cool textures to your objects. Now some of them will take some processing power because they are quite complex, so you might have to wait for them. Okay, that's a really complex one. And eventually it will appear. Remember, you need quite a strong graphic card if you're working with graphics, so it does help if your laptop has its own graphic card of its own memory. Now I can go back and back. I can just keep doing this, and I can really get some amazing stuff. There is some image effects and some gradient effects. It's beautiful, beautiful stuff here. And you know, just take your time and go through this and experiment. See what you can get sort of get up to. There's also type effects, which works really nicely for text, that you can apply to text. Okay, so it's not just for shapes that you can use these for. All right, now just one last thing. I do want to show you that you can bring images into vector art, but remember, those images must be high resolution, because if this is going to go to print, we said a vector can be blown up to any size, an image can't necessarily. So Illustrator was never made to be a program for bitmap images, but if you do want to combine the two styles, you can. So if you want to place an image wherever you got the image file from, whether you created it in Photoshop, whatever the case may be, you're going to place it. And if I use file place, I've actually got some cocktails there for my restaurant. And if I click on my document, it will bring it in. Click and drag. If you're on previous versions of Illustrator, it might make it really big. Just resize it so that it fits on your page. And now you'll see this can become part of your design. But what if we only wanted to take this one cocktail, what is that? Long Island iced tea. If we wanted to take that out and use that on our menu or on our design, then you can create a shape around an element. So I'm using the rectangle tool, and I'm saying I only want that one drink to show, and I want the shadow as well. So I've created a shape on top of it. It can be any color as well if you want to use a full color to see it properly. And then I select the image as well as that vector shape. And I right click and I click on Make Clipping Mask. And can you see now it's just the one drink that moves around. If I right click again and I say Release Clipping Mask, then it will show me all of them again. Okay. What you can also do in Illustrator, and this is a very, very powerful function, is your image trace, which means it can take any bitmap image and convert it into a real vector image. So if you want to do that, you can click on the image and you'll see this image trace will appear. The higher the quality, the longer it will take to process. So for the sake of this example, I'm going to do a 6-color example of these cocktails. It will convert it for you from the photo into a drawn illustration. And the beauty of this is it is then completely vectorized, which means we can blow that up the size of the building, or for banners, or for billboards. Can you see it? It's a drawn version. It's a vector version of what we had earlier. Beautiful. Maybe we just want to use a silhouette of a drink or something for our menu. Now, if you've created sort of a image trace, you can expand that image trace and you can ungroup it, because maybe you just want to use the drinks themselves. Now sometimes you have to ungroup them a couple of times to really get to the bit you want to use. See, now I can delete the background, I can even delete the fill there. I've got complete control over that vector now because it's actually just vector elements. So very, very powerful little trick using your image trace. Okay, so now that I've given you an arsenal of tools and ways of creating, I want you to go ahead and finish your business card and your back of your business card. And also in the end, I want you to put your main brand, your logo, nice and big on this page. On this page, I want you to create your own poster for the launch of your restaurant. Now, there's some nice backgrounds here. You can use these background effects from over here at the back if you ungroup them a couple of times, or maybe you can use this one over here. Copy the whole thing. Let me take all of it and paste it over here. And then delete all the elements on this one and make your own poster. Might be a good practice shot for you. Or maybe go look for a nice background on Vecteezy, something unique, and bring that in here, and then create your own text, you know, and then, you know, bring your own brand onto your design here. Maybe if it's contrasting colors, you can put a white screen behind it, or a colored screen. And if I arrange this, members might send backwards, and I could even change my transparency of that element. Okay, and maybe give a drop shadow to this one. So it really is playtime. I want you to just really go ahead and have fun and create a poster and create your brand. And if it's terrible, don't worry. You've got the rest of your life to become good at this. For the time being, it's really getting used to these programs, getting used to selections, getting used to getting artwork done. When you're finished, I want you to actually create a PDF that you can send to print. And in Illustrator, remember, we want to save that AI file, because that's the open file that we can come back and change later if we wanted to. But in order to go to print, we need to convert it to a PDF. And you do that by going back to File, Save As, and change it here to a PDF. You can save it as the same file. If you wanted to take a certain range out and you just wanted to save one page out, you could have said page 1, which was where the logo was, and then we only have the logo. Page 1 to 4 would mean it exports all the pages. And I will save it in that folder of yours again. And very important, you need to ask your printer which of these presets they would like. We use press quality 99.9% of the time, and most printers, these print shops that you get, or even some of the LiFo printers, it works perfectly with that. But ask your printer, what do they want? Okay, I'm going to use press quality, and I'm going to save this out. That's it, that's all I do. And if I go back to that folder, there's my final PDF. It's 2 megabytes. I can still email it, and it's got 4 separate pages. The first one with my brand, second one the front of my business card, back of my business card, and my poster. Okay, a last sort of design principle that I have to tell you that you have to use is bleed. And in Journey 2 I'll tell you much more about bleed, but it means if if a color or an image sort of goes all the way to the edge of a page, then you need to bleed it off so that if there's a problem in the cutting process, that it won't show a white line around it. Now, we had to actually add that right from the beginning. So if I go back to File and I say Document Setup, I had to add it over here. And it will create bleed on all sides, and then it will show it in the document, which means wherever I have an element running to the edge of that page, I needed to extend it. For now, don't worry too much about bleed. I will tell you lots about bleed in Journey 2, and then we will work with it. But I just wanted to make you aware of that so that you can start thinking about it when you do your designs. All right, go have fun, go create amazing stuff, submit your work. You know where to submit the work on our site. We want to see your stuff. We will feature the best stuff. and we will see you for your next session, which will be a deep dive into the free alternative to Illustrator. All right, have fun, see you soon.